What's up, JR Noble here. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over how to make R&B chord progressions. So in my last video, I covered how to make R&B chords. So if you didn't catch that one, be sure to go back and check for how to make R&B chords. All right, because that's going to lead into this one right here. In this video, I'm going to be going over how you can take those R&B chords and turning them into chord progressions and making use of those so that your music sounds more in the style of R&B. And these techniques are really useful also if you're making any other kinds of music, all right? So this does apply to other styles, and I'll show you some examples of how you can make use of chords and these chord progression techniques to make R&B style chords. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna take this pop chord progression right here, this Kehlani Good Life, and we're gonna R&B-ify it, so to speak. So I'm gonna show you how you can create an R&B chord progression from other chord progressions that already exist. All right, and so we can take this Kehlani Good Life, and it's just a really basic pop chord progression. So it's a 6-5-1-4 chord progression. All right, and we're gonna R&B-ify it. So if I go into this MIDI chord pack, now I know it's in the key of D flat major because the very first chord is D flat major, so the one chord. So if I go into D flat major, I'm gonna go to extended chords because like I said in my last video, when you wanna start making R&B sounding chords, we're just starting to use extended chords and things like inversions and suspensions. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to grab all of the same chords that are in this chord progression. All right. And I'm going to grab the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 6. Okay. And I'm going to put them in the same exact order. So the very first one is a 6. So if I go in here, I'll grab a B flat minor 7-9, the 6th chord. So if I pull this back here, and then the next one is a 5. So I'm going to grab the 5 chord and I'll grab again to the A flat major. I'm going to add the 7-9. So that's just an extended chord, right? And then I'm going to grab the 1, the D flat major. So I'll grab the 7-9. We'll make that the same as this before it. And I'm going to grab then the 4 chord. So the G flat major, which is also an F sharp. So G flat and F sharp are the same note. I'll show you how we can make adjustments to these chords to make it sound more R&B. Now, the beauty of the day and age that we live in is that you don't have to be able to play piano necessarily to be able to make really great sounding music. I myself don't play piano too well, but what I found is that the better you can play piano, the easier it is to kind of get your ideas out faster, right? So if you're having trouble with kind of getting ideas out of your head and into your DAW fast enough, being able to play a piano might actually help with getting the ideas out a little bit faster. But I've also found things like MIDI chords and things where companies like Unison have already set up MIDI chords. So you can just kind of drag and drop them into your DAW. Then you have things like Cthulhu, you have Scalar, you have Captain Chord. You have all of these companies who make plugins for chords to make it easier to make chords and chord progressions. And so now it really just comes down to understanding how to put these things together so that way you can make music faster and easier. Okay, so that doesn't sound very sexy just the way it is. It sounds kind of out of place and disjointed. This is where we're going to use inversions, like I mentioned in the previous video. So let's take the root note down an octave. Let's try bringing the 9th note down an octave. Take this one. So we're going to take, then the next chord, we'll take the root note down 1 octave. And let's get rid of the 9th on this one. And we'll take the 7th down. See how that sounds. That's a little too low. So keep the 7th up. We'll keep the bass note up high. We'll take the root note down. We'll take this 9th down. Okay, that doesn't sound good. We'll keep the 9th up. So I'm just going to take some of these notes and move them up 1 octave. And on the last one, we'll take the root note down an octave, and we'll bring the 9th down an octave. Okay, so now we have the same exact chord progression, but we're using extended chords and inversions to kind of rearrange the notes to make it sound a little bit more like R&B. So here's the Kehlani version. So it goes up, down, up, down. And now here's our new R&B version. So now it has a similar kind of vibe where it goes up, down, just like the Kehlani track, but it sounds a little bit more like R&B. Okay, so the next thing that we want to cover is passing chords. And passing chords are one way to kind of transition to another chord where it doesn't even have to be in the same scale as the other chords. So imagine like a stepping stone to get you across a little stream. So the passing chord is usually pretty short and just kind of plugged in there somewhere where it's going to help you get between one chord to the next chord. Okay, so what you're looking at now is a chord progression that I put together using a MIDI chord pack. And it's just a major chord progression in the G flat major scale. It sounds pretty nice, sounds pretty lush and kind of warm and chill, just like you would expect an R&B chord progression to sound. However, at the very end of it, I want to make it a little bit more interesting, kind of change it up a little bit. So what I can do is at this very last chord, I have 2 extra chords sitting off to the side. And what I've done was I've found 2 other kind of passing chords, okay? And I can just add those into the very end of it. And so now it's going to transition from this last chord, this flat 7th chord, to this 5th chord, which is a D flat 9. So instead of just leading straight into it, what we can do is we can add that chord in there to spice it up a bit and kind of give it a little transition before it goes back to the beginning. Right, and we can try out some different chords. We could swap that out with this 2, which is an A flat minor chord. So that one sounds like a little bit more of a subtle jump from the last chord back to the first chord. And then we can even add both of those in there. So I can jump from the 2 to the 5 back to the 1. So when it comes to passing chords, one of the main things that gets used a lot in R&B chord progressions is used a lot in also jazz and gospel. All right, and R&B pulls a lot from gospel music and jazz and things like that. So one of the really big things that they use is a 2-5-1 chord progression. And this one can be a bit of a difficult concept to kind of wrap your head around because it took me a while to really understand really what's going on with the 2-5-1 because the 2 and the 5 are not in the same scale as the one that you're playing in. So the scale we have here is a G flat major scale. Let's say I wanted to put a 2-5-1 progression in the middle of this progression, right? If I wanted to just toss one in kind of right here in the middle. And so what chord am I going to? Well, it's a D major chord. So I would have to borrow the 2 and the 5 from the D scale to place them in before this D chord.
All right, D was good tonight.
So for the D flat major scale, what I want to do is I want to go into D flat major and I can borrow a basic triad chord or I can do extended chords. I'm going to use extended chords so that way I can move them around and keep it sounding in that R&B kind of vibe. And I'm going to grab out the 2 and the 5 chords. So these are just 2 extended chords. They're just basically the 2 chord and the 5 chord from the D major scale. What I'll do is I'll shorten these up quite a bit. And we just want them really short because they're just going to lead us into that D chord. And so if the D chord starts right here, and we're just going to slide these 2 in just before it. And now we'll see what it sounds like, and it might not sound the greatest, so we may need to move some notes around. So we're going to use those inversions that we talked about in the other video. So it sounds like a bit of a stretch to get from this 5 back to the 1. So I'm going to move some of these notes around. Might even take out that 9. That sounds like a better jump there. So what we're doing there is we're using the 2 and the 5 to lead us to the 1. And that's really how you can use passing chords. Now the 2-5-1 chord progression gets used a ton in R&B music. So if you want to make your chord progressions sound more like they're in that R&B and gospel vibe, then you definitely want to make use of this 2-5-1 chord progression. Now, the third thing you can do to really make your chords and chord progressions sound R&B is what I like to call chord rhythms, right? And so it's taking those chords and giving them a rhythmic element. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a chord progression that's in the key of G major this time. And all I did was I changed the very last chord. So I took this 4-chord chord progression, duplicated it, made it twice as long, and changed the very last chord to kind of make it a little bit more interesting right at the end. And so that is just a really generic sounding chord progression, okay? And so one thing that you can do to make things more interesting is use chord rhythms, okay? And in R&B, there's actually some rhythms and rhythmic patterns I've noticed that people use to kind of give it some extra flavor. So this right here is just one particular example that you can use for rhythm patterns. And so all I really did there was I took those chords that you see beforehand, those just long sustained chords, and I broke them up into a rhythmic pattern. And that's a really easy way for you to take those R&B chord progressions and then give them a little bit more extra flavor. Now this chord rhythm pattern that I have is something a little bit more contemporary. It sounds a little bit more like some R&B songs that you might hear on the radio. All right, and there's other styles of R&B. There's the more chilled out, slow, down tempo kind of stuff. So it kind of varies on how you can change up these chord rhythm patterns. And I'll show you a couple of other examples just so you can see some of the variations that you might find. Now, there's some really useful resources I've come across that have helped me to kind of get my head around how to make use of these particular techniques. Some channels that I've followed that might be really useful for you are things like Mangold Project, Michael New, Jeff Schneider, or Piano with Warren. Now, some of those are more like if you want to play piano, right? And I would recommend maybe checking out Michael New or Mangold Project if you're kind of beginner, just kind of starting out, beginner to intermediate. And then people like Jeff Schneider and also Piano with Warren, those are ones are a little bit more useful when you get a little bit more advanced with your understanding of the music theory and how all this stuff kind of works. So I covered 3 key points for making R&B chord progressions. The first is you can take existing chord progressions and you can alter and modify them to make them sound more like R&B by using extended chords and inversions or suspensions. And then the second thing I covered is using passing chords, and specifically a 2-5-1 chord progression, all right, that's used a lot in R&B and gospel music. And then the third thing is using chord rhythms, all right, so adding some spices of flavor by altering the rhythmic pattern of the chords, so that way it sounds a little bit more interesting, but also keeps it in that R&B kind of vibe. So once again, this is JR Noble signing off for today. You can't spell truth without you, so stay true to yourself, be truthful to others, and have fun while you're doing it, all right? So thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and then also hit that little bell notification so that way you can get updates when I upload new videos.